The marriage relationship is a good metaphor for what is happening at Mount Sinai. The prince rescues the fair maiden from the villainous dragon, and then he proposes to her, and she says yes, and they get married. The covenant is ratified. And what happens next? Well, now it's time for them to move in together. So Yahweh intends to move his fiery presence from the top of Mount Sinai down into the middle of the camp of Israel. But then the unthinkable happens, and the bride cheats on her groom while they're on their honeymoon. But we've already covered that. So let's go back to Yahweh's intention to dwell among his people in the tabernacle. Now, Yahweh explicitly states his purpose for redeeming Israel from Egypt. Take a look at this in chapter 29. In 29, verse 46, and they shall know that I am Yahweh their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, so that, in order that, for the purpose that I might dwell among them. Dwell among them in the sanctuary, the tent of meeting. And specifically, it says at the entrance of the tent of meeting. That is where I will meet with you, where I will meet with all of the people, where they will all fellowship with Yahweh as they offer their sacrifices in the court of the tabernacle. But in a more concentrated way, Yahweh's presence will be in the Holy of Holies. And this is above the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant, which is in the Holy of Holies, in front of the mercy seat. The mercy seat, which is the cover, the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, which has two cherubim facing one another there on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And the Old Testament is consistent in describing this as the place of Yahweh's throne. Take a look at Psalm 99, which says that Yahweh sits enthroned upon the cherubim. This is the two cherubim on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. And this, it seems, this specific location within the Holy of Holies, this is where Yahweh will speak with Moses. And look at this. He'll speak with Moses face to face. Thus, the Lord used to speak with Moses face to face as a man speaks with his friend. That is stunning. And God will communicate with Moses for the purpose that he would warn the people about the statutes and laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Man, this kind of specific, direct, unveiled communication with Yahweh is such a stunning picture. Well, I want to help you visualize what the tabernacle might have looked like and functioned like. Chapters 25 to 31 give us an extremely detailed literary blueprint of the tabernacle and all of its furniture. And this blueprint allows us to imagine with a high degree of accuracy what that space may have looked like. Take a look at this model, which has been created. I believe it's located in Israel somewhere. So this is the tabernacle as a whole. This is the tent of meeting. But outside the tent of meeting, this is the court. And the court was accessible by all Israel. This is where they would bring their sacrifices to be burnt on the altar. This is the basin for cleaning, ceremonial washing. And inside of the tent of meeting proper, it had two spaces. This is that tent of meeting. The holy place. Within the holy place, there's the table for showbread. There's a golden lamp. And there's the altar of incense. But then beyond the veil, we have the Holy of Holies, and that's where the Ark of the Covenant is, with its mercy seat and the two cherubim above it. Well, this whole space was incredibly beautiful. Exodus describes 730 shekels of gold was used to overlay and to create all of these different objects within the tent of meeting. Now, 730 shekels is 2,193 pounds. That is a lot of gold to overlay the bars and the frames and the poles and to make the golden lampstand. That is a lot of gold. Well, anyways, all of this was created according to the pattern which was shown to Moses on the mountain. Now, this phrase is repeated 4 times within this section of the book of Exodus. Let me show you those 4 times because I think we should repeat it just for um, the sake of getting it in our brains. Exactly as I showed you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle, so you shall make it. So see that you make them after the pattern which has been shown you on the mountain. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan that you were shown on the mountain. You shall make it as it has been shown to you on the mountain. Well, what pattern? What pattern was shown to Moses? What did Moses literally see while he was on top of the mountain? I am so curious to know. Well, we do know that God communicated with Moses face to face. He descended in fire on Mount Sinai. And the 70 elders, well, they went only halfway up the mountain, but Moses, he went the whole way up. And what did those 70 elders see versus what Moses saw? Let's jump to Exodus 24 and look at the contrast between the space where those 70 elders dwelt and had that ceremonial meal, and then where Moses went beyond them to the top of Mount Sinai. So here, Moses and Aaron and those 70 elders, they went up and they saw the God of Israel. Wow, what did they see? That's incredible. And there was under his feet, perhaps they only saw his feet. Maybe they were looking up. There was a pavement of sapphire stone like the very heaven for clearness. So these guys, they went halfway up the mountain, but then Moses, he came even farther. He went up to the very top. He went up the mountain, and a cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of Yahweh was dwelling there on Mount Sinai like a devouring fire on the very top. Here we are, the top of the mountain. Well, it is as if I wonder, it is as if Moses and all the 70 elders, they entered into the holy place. That's what halfway up the mountain is. But Moses went beyond the holy place into the Holy of Holies, which is at the very top of Mount Sinai, beyond the veil. And it seems like this veil, which separates the holy place from the holy place, is set on analogy to this pavement of sapphire stone, which is like the heaven for clearness. Beyond the veil, beyond the pavement, where you see not only the feet of God, but the face of God as well. And I wonder if this isn't the same thing that's described in the throne room in Revelation 4, where John saw the throne room in heaven, and he saw before the throne a sea of glass like crystal, which was so incredibly clear. It was of glass. It was like crystal, just like this pavement was like the very heaven for clearness. So the veil is the pavement, is the sea of glass, is the rakia. Do you remember that word? The rakia is the sky dome. It is the vault, the expanse, the firmament, which is created on day 2 of creation, separating the waters above from the waters below, separating Earth's or man's space from God's space. And this vault, this pavement, this sea of glass, is what Moses penetrated, went beyond, it seems, and what he saw while on the mountain. In the same way that John entered the throne room, so Moses is doing so at the top of Mount Sinai. And it seems that the book of Hebrews is teaching that the tabernacle, the earthly place of holiness, was merely a copy of the greater and more perfect tent, which is heaven itself. So that is the sense in which what Moses saw was a pattern or a copy of the heavenly things themselves. Fascinating. Well, the very first place like this on earth, this tabernacle space, this ideal space where man's space and God's space overlaps, where heaven and earth come together, was the Garden of Eden. This is where God met with man and walked with them. That verb is critical. You remember how God walked with Adam and Eve in the garden? Well, let me remind you. It's in Genesis chapter 3, where the Lord was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Notice how Deuteronomy describes the tabernacle. It says that the Lord your God walks in your midst, in the midst of your camp. That is the middle of your camp. That is where the tabernacle was located, in the middle of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, what other similarities are there between the Garden of Eden here in this right column and the tabernacle in this left column? Well, their construction process was similar. The Garden of Eden, or the cosmic temple, it was created in 7 days. And so the tabernacle, the instructions for the tabernacle were communicated to Moses in 7 speech acts. 7 times in chapters 25 to 31 contains the phrase, and Yahweh spoke to Moses. See this? The Lord spoke to Moses 7 times, and then it lists all of the things which follow after this introductory phrase. And then also there are the tabernacle is created, or that is assembled, in 7 acts of obedience to the word of God, and we'll look at that a little bit more in a minute. And then in the same way that the Garden of Eden seemed to have 3 different regions of holiness, where there is the garden, or there is the Eden itself, this region of Eden, and then there's the Garden of Eden, and then there's the tree at the very center of that garden. So in the same way, we have the outer court of the tabernacle, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. And of course, there's a similarity with Mount Sinai itself as well. And then if we look at the progression of the construction of this space, after it was completed, we have this same verb used in each instance. God rests, or he enters into his resting place, which is his sanctuary, first his tabernacle and later his temple. And then a blessing is issued. God blesses the 7th day, and Moses blesses the people after the construction of the tabernacle. What other similarities are there between the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle as dwelling places for God among men? Well, the tabernacle is designed to remind us of Eden based on what it is made of and what it looks like and its contents. So it is filled with plants. The lampstand, the golden lampstand, looks like a tree. The tree's got branches, there's almond blossoms on it and flowers. The tabernacle contains, or at least the high priest's breastplate contains many precious stones, and there's a couple of precious stones which are mentioned in Genesis 2 as being located in the region of Eden. And then curiously, in Genesis 2:10 to 12, it says that the land of Havilah is where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. And we know, we've seen already, there's 2,193 pounds of gold in the tent of meeting. And God's goal is to bring man back into the garden, and that is what the tabernacle is simulating, our return to the garden beyond the cherubim. And you remember there are cherubim guarding the entrance back into the Garden of Eden, and so there are cherubs placed at each level of the tabernacle. If we are to return to this picture, there are cherubim worked into the veil. There are cherubim worked into the screen, and there are cherubim worked into this outer door as well, into the court. But God wants us to go past those cherubim and, quite literally, past the rakia as well. The rakia is this blue sky dome between our space and God's space. And that's why the veil is described as being blue. The curtains are of fine twined linen, and they were blue. The veil is of blue. The screen is blue. And the gate of the court, it also is of blue and purple and scarlet yarns. Well, God's goal is to get us beyond the cherub, beyond the rakia, and into the very presence of God. Well, there are few high points in the book of Exodus uh, about the people of Israel. It seems like they are messing up and being faithless again and again. However, the collection the collection of materials for the construction of the tabernacle is certainly one of those high points, and we would be remiss to neglect that moment, because Moses calls on everyone of the people of Israel who is of a generous heart to bring their gold, their silver, their precious stones, their yarn, their wood, and the people respond. And they respond so much so that Moses has to order them. We have enough. We have more than we need. Stop bringing your donations for the tabernacle. So that's a very positive moment for the people of Israel here in chapter 35. Now the people, they give their treasure towards this work, and they give their time as well. Moses calls for every skilled craftsman to come and to make the various pieces of the tabernacle. Now, this effort is led by a man named Bezalel. And Bezalel is a son of Hur, which means he is of the tribe of Judah. And he is the second person in the Bible to be described as being filled with the Spirit. Joseph is the first one who gets that description. Well, Bezalel is the second, filled with the Spirit, in the same way that the Spirit is present in the creation of the cosmic temple in Genesis 1, chapter 2. So we see the Spirit is present and active in the construction, the creation of God's new dwelling among his people there in the camp. Well, after the collection in chapter 35, Bezalel and his boys get to work, and they start building the tabernacle in chapter 36. Now, if you thought that chapters 25 to 31 were challenging, reading this verbal blueprint, chapters 36 to 39 are going to be excruciating. And that is because they are an exact word for word repetition of the instructions in 25 to 31. Take a look at how similar these sections are. It's actually, if it wasn't sad, it almost would be comical. So here in chapter 25, we have the instructions that Moses received while on Mount Sinai for, in this case, building the table of showbread. And then in chapter 37, we have the actual construction of that table by Bezalel. Let's read a couple of these lines. God says to Moses, "You shall make a table of acacia wood." And then in chapter 37, Bezalel also made a table of acacia wood. 2 cubits shall be its length, 1 cubit its breadth, and 1.5 cubits its height. 2 cubits was its length, 1 cubit its breadth, and 1.5 cubits its height. Overlay it with gold, make a molding. He overlaid it with gold, and he made a molding. He made a rim and a molding of gold around the rim. He made a rim and a molding of gold around the rim. All of these lines exactly the same. What is going on? Now, sometimes you'll notice that there's a slight rearranging of some of the lines. Here in this case, this is the creation of the bronze altar. A couple of the lines are swapped here, but still so incredibly similar, the instructions and the construction of the tabernacle and all of its parts. And each of these parts, they too are in a very similar order. If you look at a macro level, let me zoom out just a hair here. So these are the instructions in chapters 25 to 31. Here is the construction in chapters 35 to 39. And you'll notice these pockets of similarity where God tells to Moses the design for the ark, the table, and the lampstand, which is the same order of its construction. Bezalel first makes an ark, then the table, then the lampstand. And then following the instructions for the bronze altar, we have the court and the priest's garments, and a similar order of the creation of these things as well. Now you'll notice how we took the statements or the elements of Bezalel's involvement and the commands to keep the Sabbath from the end of the tabernacle instructions, and we put them at the beginning of the tabernacle construction, which makes a lot of sense. We're told at the end of the instructions, hey, make sure you keep the Sabbath as you're building the tabernacle. And then at the beginning, we're reminded again, hey, you better keep the Sabbath as you're building the tabernacle. That makes a whole lot of sense. But even still, the final line of each section is very similar as well, using the same verb when he had finished speaking to Moses on Mount Sinai, giving him all of these instructions. And thus, all the work on the tabernacle was finished, and all the people did as the Lord had commanded them. Well, why then why do we have so much repetition between instructions and construction? It seems like our space in these scrolls in the Old Testament, this is precious territory. Why waste it with so much repetition? Well, the fundamental answer to this question is that repetition signals importance. We just read that the reason God redeemed his people was so that he would enter into a covenant with them, dwell with them, among them as their king. And the tabernacle is the pinnacle of that purpose. But this repetition also contributes to the literary design of this section of the book of Exodus. We have a little natural chiasm, I'm sure that you recognize. We have tabernacle instructions, and then golden calf, and then tabernacle construction. We have a little chiasm happening here, where we initially are presented with the ideal relationship of Yahweh with his people, but then we're exposed to a problem with that ideal, that the sinful hearts of God's covenant partners, and we have a partial resolution of that problem with Moses' intercession, which allows us to begin construction on the tabernacle. However, that construction only reveals another problem here in the last chapter of the book of Exodus, chapter 40. And this problem comes after the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. The tabernacle is assembled, it is created, but then we have a problem following that. Now, let me just remind you, we have a lot of different elements, a lot of different steps in the making of the tabernacle. We got the instructions, the construction, which builds all the pieces, and then the assembling, which puts all the pieces together. And it puts them together in 7 acts of obedience. And this is kind of interesting and worth looking at. These sevens, we had 7 statements in the instruction section while on Sinai, and now we have 7 acts of assembling here in chapter 40. And notice how we have God's command to Moses in the first 8 verses of that chapter, and then we have the obedience to that command, which follows that in the exact same order, and it's quite telling, where God tells Moses, "You shall erect the tabernacle," and then Moses erected the tabernacle as the Lord had commanded Moses. "You shall put the ark of the testimony, and you shall screen the ark with a veil." And then he brought the ark into the tabernacle, and he screened it as the Lord commanded him. "You shall bring in the table and arrange it." Well, he brought in the table and he arranged it as the Lord commanded him 7 times. And then we have a couple of bonus elements here without this "as the Lord commanded him" section. Clearly, we're intended to count up to the number 7. Well, like I alluded a minute ago, after the tabernacle is assembled, we have this problem. The glory has filled it, but Exodus chapter 40, verse 35, the cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of the Lord filled that space, but Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it and the glory of the Lord had filled the tabernacle. What is going on here? Why can't Moses enter the tabernacle? I mean, I could understand if the people themselves can't enter it. They have proven themselves not worthy. But Moses, he's been on the top of Mount Sinai. He speaks with Yahweh face to face. Clearly, something has happened between Moses receiving the instructions for the tabernacle and its purpose, and the assembling and construction of that tabernacle here in chapter 40. Something has changed, which has fundamentally altered the calculus in this equation and has ruptured Yahweh's relationship with his people, such that even their covenant mediator, like Moses, cannot enter into his presence while his presence is located in the midst of a sinful people. And of course, that thing that happened that changed the calculus is the golden calf narrative. Therefore, for this holy God to dwell in the midst of an unholy people, we need to set up guidelines. We need ritual practices that regulate Yahweh's interaction with his people and protect those people from Yahweh's fiery holiness. And those guidelines are spelled out in painstaking detail in the next book of the Torah, the book of Leviticus.